The year 1900 dawned on a world that was simmering with political energy. In Europe, Bavaria was steadily losing status, while Riga and Valois were maintaining theirs. Andalusia was just barely maintaining its colonial empire, and England was fighting hard against the ascendant French to maintain their position of power on the continent. The Papal State, however, was still incredibly powerful, and was in fact the primary global power at the time. Wallachia had made inroads into Bavaria and Anglo-esque territory, while Scandinavia remained in a state of eventless peace. Romania was holding firmly to the middle of the pack of great powers, and had the Papal State as a faithful ally, making it a respectable nation and a force to be feared. To the east, Siberia had finally been completely claimed, mostly by Turkestan, but partly by Qinghai. The Republic of Wu remained a great power and the world's foremost democracy, while Japan was a secondary power that held more military might than some of the great powers. Deccan and Jaunpur had remained stagnant, while Oceania as a whole looked largely the same as it did a century ago. The Middle East, however, was in flux. Egypt had been the first country to fall to communism and threatened the Islamic holy cities of Mecca and Medina with destruction, setting them in enmity against Mazandaran and Yemen. Africa was wildly different and full of colonies. France and the Papal State carved up the continent between the two, with Valois taking a large slice of the Ivory Coast and Andalusia maintaining their hold on the region of Algeria. North America was stable, with the Anglo-esque Malayans and the USCA dividing the continent in thirds, with minor native settlements and papal colonies scattered throughout. South America largely belonged to the papal colony there, with Andalusia taking northern Argentina and Japan taking Patagonia. The Anglo-esque had lost some hold there, but firmly controlled the Caribbean. Finally, Colombia and Brazil were the independent nations of South Africa that were trying to keep the colonial presence in check. One thing that was known for certain at the turn of the century, however, was that the nations of the world were beginning to drift politically towards the fringes, with Egypt exporting rebels to places like Ansbach, Italy, and Anglo-esque Austria proper. The Red Menace became a real, tangible enemy. With Romania, the monarchy's power of royal pardoning had allowed far-right politics to thrive, namely through the instrument of Caesar Froza and his Black Battalion that began to run guns to anti-communist rebels in Egypt and send small groups of officers to train right-wing militias abroad, all completely under the parliament's nose and with the clandestine blessing of the Král. Meanwhile, on the 20th of April, Romania's fifth expedition to the North Pole, after the first four disappeared, finally reached it and lived to tell the tale. In fact, they were the first people in general to reach the North Pole, bringing honor to Romanian science. This was thanks, in part, to Romanian Greenland, which had made itself useful insofar that its very location on the Arctic Circle made such an endeavor possible in the first place. On the 26th of September, after slipping in the polls for the third straight election, the Partidul Communist organized the September Revolution, using the union bosses of the munitions factories across Romania to organize an Egyptian-style overthrow of the Romanian government. 100,000 communists rose their red banners over half the provinces in Romania. The Black Battalion got to work, while government forces struggled to respond to such a widespread threat. On the 10th of November, meanwhile, Romania agreed to attend the first Olympic Games, along with England, Wallachia, Bavaria, Riga, Zaporozhye, Easterly Wallachia, the Qasim Khanate, and Anatolian. By November 26th, the Red Guards were all dead, imprisoned, or back in hiding, thanks to the ruthless and sometimes inhumane tactics used by Froza's Black Battalion. Other countries were not so fortunate, and in April of 1902, Polotsk became the first European country to fall to communism, partially due to the arrival of failed communist revolutionaries which fled Romania. On the 21st of October, Wallachia declared war on Romania for the conquest of Rumelia, betting on the idea that not all of Romania's allies would be faithful to a call to arms. They were mistaken, however, and over half of Europe converged on their middling kingdom. Wallachia surrendered unconditionally after almost all their territory was occupied by April, and were made to demilitarize and give reparations to the 5 members of the Romanian alliance, amounting to half their income every year for 10 years. On the 1st of March 1904, in the town square in Bucharest, outside of the royal palace, General Caesar Froza gave a rousing speech, flanked by 200 soldiers of his Black Battalion. He spoke to the people of the threat of communism, how the insipid forces of the Red Menace infiltrated every aspect of their lives, and whispered to their politicians, slipping them sweet, utopian poison through their ears. He decried the traitorous actions of the Partidul Communist, which he called a terrorist farce in the pocket of the Egyptian government. He spoke of how foreigners aided and abetted the Red Cause, with gypsies, Tartars, and even the Amesticati in league against the Romanian people, utilizing economic usury and cultural sabotage to divide Romania, and lure its folk into a life of degeneracy. It must be stated that the Amesticati were the majority culture group of Wallachia, a composite of Greek, Anglo-Lisk, Turk, Gypsy, and Romanian language and cultural practices that had emulsified into a singular distinct ethnicity. Froza continued, saying Romanians who were destined to live strong and undiluted in their ancestral homeland must take back what is theirs from those who have disgraced it, whether the foreigners were willing to leave or not. He ended his speech with the national motto, In Fide Salus, which was echoed in unison by his 200 men. The thousands that gathered in the square applauded him, and followed his speech by storming the streets of the city, brutalizing known communists and immigrants, smashing the windows of their businesses and setting their printing presses aflame. The police came to stop this, and resorted immediately to violence. By the end of it all, around 8 p.m., 8 hours after Froza's speech was given, thousands of ducats in damages were incurred, 130 people were injured, 25 had died, and Caesar Froza was taken away in shackles. When the royal pardon arrived at the prison the next day, he was found with his left eye gouged out, and he maintained that he sustained that injury in prison. The police admitted under interrogation that they accepted a sizable bribe from the Partidul Communist and allowed them to send a warning to Froza. Upon his recovery, Caesar Froza left his official capacity as a general and got involved with politics, while remaining the de facto leader of the Black Battalion just the same. On the 1st of January 1906, Caesar Froza founded his fascist party, named Garda de Fier, or the Iron Guard. His party advocated for protectionist trade policy, state capitalist economic policy, moralist religious policy, residency and citizenship, and a jingoist military policy. The seventh party participating in Romanian politics, nobody truly thought that the Iron Guard were going to have a shot at guiding policy with such a crowded field. Beginning in late August, the Iron Guard began to circulate a fascist newspaper, with the editor being the very father of fascism himself, Caesar Froza. The newspaper was called Romanian Dawn, and decried communists, liberals, conservatives, foreigners, socialists, minorities, feminists, suffragists, homosexuals, capitalists, criminals, and deviants of every stripe. Despite the sheer number of things it condemned with a fiery passion, it still managed to ring true with a significant portion of the Romanian population, and was primarily read by the middle class. By May, liberal activists took to the streets in response, handing out pamphlets and holding freedom marches in favor of the ruling Partidul Liberal. This was largely in response to how popular and publicly active the Iron Guard were getting to be by 1907. The elections of 1908 began with the Partidul Communist going to ballot boxes in the regions of Luhansk and Bucharest, where the Iron Guard was most popular, and threatening certain voters or denying them entry to their eventual polling places altogether. Meanwhile, the Liberal government dispatched the army to deal with this, and removed the most of them peacefully, some violently, and some were relegated to police. As for the police, the communist agitators were either removed by force, or they stayed, for a certain price that went straight into police pockets. This highlighted for the people how corrupt the current system was, and how ineffective it was at dealing with revolutionary Marxists. On the 29th of January 1908, another split occurred within the Conservative Party, meaning an eighth party had formed and was competing in the race. This was the Partidul Conservator Democrat, who were hoping to be an alternative to the Liberal Party. They moved their platform so close, in fact, that the only difference between the Partidul Conservator Democrat and the Partidul Liberal was their pluralist religious platform as opposed to a secularized one. They secured the votes of many disillusioned liberal voters who were not quite so upset as to vote fascist. Ironically, they were repulsive to Conservator and Taransek, who found their pro-military stance to be a betrayal of the Romanian conservative platform. On the 19th of April, France brought Suez from impoverished Egypt and its struggling planned economy and built the Suez Canal there, making a new gateway for global trade.